Now, an assessment of the quality of doctoral qualifications offered by 28 universities has highlighted serious concerns over dropout rates and the time students take to complete the degree. PhDs offered by 23 public universities and 5 private institutions were measured against a national qualification standard approved in November 2018. For more on this, we are joined by Dr. Whitfield, Chief Executive Officer of the Council on Higher Education, Deputy Dean Research and Innovation at the Northwest University, Professor Washington Dudu, Professor Labby Ramrathan, Education Faculty, University of KwaZulu-Natal, and Professor Shervani Pillay, Associate Professor, Department of Postgraduate and Mature Students at Nelson Mandela University. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight here on In Focus and helping us through this conversation. Of course, I read the outcome of the assessment, and it is by no means an indication that our institutions are not on par in terms of some of the quality PhDs that are coming out of there. However, there is this concern of inequity, and particularly around these 28 that have been flagged. Professor Shervani, let me begin with you. First and foremost, do we have a deeper understanding now of the developmental and structural elements that inform our doctoral experience?
Yes, I definitely think so, and I think for that I would like to extend my appreciation to the CHE for lifting the bar on doctoral studies and for, their vision and leadership in prioritizing a qualification that has been marginalized historically, not just in South Africa, but of course globally. And I think what this creation of the standard does, it gives us a common vision to which we can aspire to. It's a significant benchmark for us. And the fact that, we were being evaluated actually is a point for introspection, to look at the extent to which we as institutions can actually develop our postgraduate studies in such a way that we create inclusive doctoral environments for our doctoral students. I think one of the issues is that we need to. We've sort of moved away from the whole apprenticeship kind of model of doctoral supervision, where you had this isolated journey or experience with a doctoral student and a supervisor. But now that is long, it's become obsolete now. And now we begin to see, and I think the shift marks a shift in seeing a different model where supervision can be seen as a pedagogy as well. And in view of that, there's a strong focus on saying you need to identify what the problems are with the students. And then you have to work towards contributing or creating an enabling inclusive environment that is accessible and supportive to our doctoral students. Yeah. And I think the different standards the elucidation of the standards provides a very good framework for us to work within. And so, we're not crawling anymore in some kind of misty kind of dimension and sort of each person and each institution doing their own thing. Yeah. I think this kind of standardization of benchmarking and the threshold is really good.
It's very interesting. I mean, you have, of course, gone ahead to talk to us about some of the changes that are already in place. But let's go back a little bit and look at, Professor Ramrathan, the various categories of the doctoral experience which are highlighted here, one of which being the completion and the attrition rate. So explore it for me in respect of the external elements first, which Professor Pillay has already touched on. So the element of supervision, the element of the departments or the structural issues that speak to this particular issue, and issues like financial support. How much of a role do these play in the doctoral experience that many of our students are having in South Africa?
It's a very complex issue, shall I say, because there is no one factor that could actually lead to a doctoral student dropping out from a doctoral program, it's a combination. I think first we have to realize that the doctoral program is the pinnacle qualification on our national qualification frameworks. And the kinds of demands of a student is substantive because that person needs to demonstrate an expert knowledge of the area in which he or she is researching, as well as have a broad understanding of the entire field. And it's quite a tall order. Now, to achieve that in a doctoral program, one actually have to begin to get the necessary support to achieve that. And one of the biggest issues that we have in South Africa is the issue of supervision capacity. So it's not only on the students that may not necessarily have the opportunity to complete, but it's about the supervision that the students get in order to be able to come to that level. And remember, your doctoral thesis is examined by 3 people, generally. And all of them look at it from different perspectives. And so one needs to anticipate the kinds of level that a community requires of a doctoral graduate. And therefore, the supervision is one aspect. The second is around students themselves. The doctoral program, in theory, can be completed in 2 years, if you're doing it full time. In practice, it happens at 3 years, and generally students take between 3 to 6 years to complete. On average, 4.5 years for a completion of a doctoral study. It is extremely difficult for the students to sustain a livelihood over that 4.5 years of being doctoral program. So the financial support that they require is lacking to provide the students with the opportunities to dedicate their studies in a time-constrained way. So all of these is impact on the students in terms of completion rates. And we've seen students that start the doctoral programs, institutions offer bursaries and financial aids, and that sometimes goes up to 2 or 3 years. And thereafter, the students is left without any financial resources to manage both the lives as well as the requirements to sustain the doctoral programs. So this is quite a complex situation in terms of what explains why students take long to complete or why they actually drop out. It's not about the capacity or the capabilities of being able to do a doctoral study.
Yeah. Professor Dudu, reflect on what factors shape the well-being of doctoral students in, for example, the context of one study that looked at universities that have high completion and short time degree rates, focusing, for example, on the effective student socialization as being one of the key issues.
Well, thank you so much. Basically, for me, the issue here is on the general lack of awareness and understanding of the doctoral graduate attributes amongst, there can be students, academics, institutional support staff, and how the attainment of such graduate attributes is monitored and measured during as well as at the end of the doctoral journey of a student. So when a student enrolls to participate in a PhD journey, it has to be inclusive from date of registration to date of graduation. So the conditions and facilities which are provided for such have to be nurtured in such a way that they really ensure that the candidate becomes fully enjoyed into them, so that at the end the country can also produce. So we don't want to have students who just enroll and at the end of the day, they don't know what they've been in the system for and what they really wanted to come up with. So the issue of graduate attributes becomes so much. So when a student enrolls, is it clear what the student is going to attain besides the PhD paper at the end of the day, which says the colleague is a doctor? Does the student therefore reflect and know that now this is what I attained and I have gone through the process and I've achieved? Yeah.
So while you are there, that one of the internal factors is precisely what you're raising, is that students struggle to get academic identity, so self-worth, self-efficacy, and what exactly it is that they are wanting to do with this PhD. So how do you get to a point where they are able to master that aspect of things, where they are able to immediately, as they get in, be able to have their own academic identity well articulated, so to speak?
It depends on the institution, but basically what happens is we have what's known as the higher degrees manual, for example. Such important attributes must be placed in such an important document, so that as they register and as they start with their proposals, amongst other things on how to defend the proposal, the ethics, and the whole journey, definitely, it must be clearly stated that by the end of the program, this is what they will have achieved. So I propose that this can be in important documents such as the higher degrees manual for students to be guided throughout the whole journey.
Yeah. Dr. Green, one of the issues, of course, that the assessment is highlighting is students' underpreparedness for postgraduate studies. Is there a degree of limitations in terms of our internal quality assurance processes that ensure that those who do end up signing up are actually adequately prepared?
Thank you, and thank you to Newzroom Afrika for hosting us tonight on this important conversation. I think there are multiple factors, as my colleagues have indicated, that relate to a student dropout and slow progression through the doctoral journey. You know, psychosocial factors, life logistic factors, academic factors all come together in different ways, in different contexts. But if we hone into the specific question you're asking around underpreparedness of students, I think Prof. Ramrathan spoke about the PhD as the apex qualification. And so there's a qualification pathway that leads to it. And certainly if we're seeing elements of unpreparedness at the PhD level, then we have to be thinking about the pathway that leads to the PhD. And what is our quality in terms of a master's preparation? What kind of undergraduate competences are we developing in our undergraduate students? So it is a bigger conversation. The conversation about the PhD and quality opens up the conversation about the whole qualification pipeline. And certainly, I think if we're considering the issue of a student's unpreparedness as one factor, right? We don't want to say that problems related to the PhD are only related to students. That's really one small part of it. But if we are considering that, then we have to think about the pathway and how we're preparing students to take up the PhD journey.
Let's take a break. When we continue, we explore this a little bit further. Is enough focus being given to motivation, achievement, and well-being of doctoral students? The question we're asking you tonight, 072-110-5584. You can tweet us also tonight at Newzroom405. Our guest staying on, and In Focus continues shortly. Back with you tonight on In Focus, addressing that situation, coming out of the assessment of the quality of qualification, coming out of 28 universities in the private and the public sector when it comes to PhDs, revealing a concerning trend of a dropout of PhD students, and of course highlighting some of the other issues that it looked at, including student underpreparedness for postgraduate studies, limitations in internal quality assurance processes, and developed standards for the doctorate, and of course the number of students who complete their doctoral studies in the 2 years that is stipulated. Still with us, Dr. Whitfield Green. He's the CEO of the Council for Higher Education. Professor Washington Dudu from the Northwest University of KwaZulu-Natal, Professor Labby Ramrathan, and Professor Shervani Pillay from the Nelson Mandela University. Professor Shervani, let's come back to you. I mean, you already mentioned that the days of no collaboration between the faculty and students are now a thing of the past. One of the issues that are highlighted, particularly when we speak of the time of degree, is the question of the lack of structure in the doctoral programs themselves, particularly in the final dissertation phase, which contributes to low motivation, particularly for students who have not necessarily mastered the necessary skill of research, but also the necessary skill of writing. How do we approach that?
I think that is one of the challenges that we experience, and the unpreparedness of some students. And of course, the reasons, there are many reasons for that, one of which the report points out is coming from a master's qualification that did not adequately prepare them, and of course the admissions process that is not as rigorous as it should be. So when you the idea, as Prof. Washington has said, is to identify with the student at the beginning of the journey, so that we can become aware of what the student's challenges are and begin to address it from that level. So when it comes to right at the end, and they're still struggling, then that's a real problem. I think the report is very clear that we have to ensure that we have support strategies for students in place. So, for example, the development of writing centers and doctoral centers for doctoral students, where we actually provide them with that kind of support, and programs, development programs, academic programs that help them with the different kind of skills and the different kind of knowledge attributes that they require, to actually work them through that, and start right from the beginning to work them through those attributes, to de-aggregate what we understand when we say that a doctoral qualification is at the apex. What does it mean? What does it mean to produce original research? What does it mean to traverse the boundaries of the discipline and so forth? So we really, and at our institution, for example, we have programs, institutional programs, as well as in the faculty, which continue throughout the year. And what we tend to do is we tend to identify the gaps that our students are experiencing, and we do this, from a range of sources, and then we put together programs that attend to these. So we have programs that that everyone can attend, but we also have bespoke programs where we identify specific problems with specific students. So those are some of the strategies that we can use, and I think this is what the report is saying. It's saying to us, you can attend to high attrition rates, and you can attend to students being demotivated and not wanting to complete. You've got to have a process and a program in place, a structured program that meets the needs of the students. Of course, there's many challenges with that. One of the biggest problems, I think, is that doctoral students are mostly part-time, and mainly because they cannot afford to be studying part-time, full-time, and and not to work, and so they have families to support and so forth. So with students studying part-time, there's always the added challenges, of professional commitments and personal commitments. So they actually have a lot on their plate, and trying to also attend to their studies is also a challenge to them. So we need to really keep our ear to the ground and to be attentive to what their needs are and what their challenges are, and then structure programs around those kind of needs.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Professor Labby, how do we do that? I'm going to take you back to it. I know you've already mentioned it. It's one of the, I suppose, particularly critical factors, facilitating student career advancement in a way that will be able to support the students financially while they remain academic. I mean, it's a broad conversation, because it also means maybe we need to speak to banks, because they also need to have loans to be able to pay for these studies. We also maybe need to come up with scholarships, or maybe look at grants. But also there's a broader conversation around employment opportunities, either within universities or within other spaces.
Yeah, I think, some universities actually use their needs for additional staff, and so they draw on doctoral candidates into those posts as part-time contract work to support them. There is also funding opportunities through the National Research Foundations, the National Institute of Human and Social Sciences, that provides fundings to sustain some of the students' financial needs. So there are lots of opportunities in which students can draw financial support to sustain themselves. But this is not uniform across all institutions, largely because of the varying financial needs of institutions, the financial burdens that institutions have. So how to support students in terms of trying to sustain themselves is a big challenge, both for institutions as well as individuals.
Yeah.
But in terms of trying to support them in terms of the academic endeavors, there's lots of opportunities for that. We have lots of doctoral cohort programs. There is conferences that organize early career research activities to support students on a national and regional levels. There is other groupings that provide additional support to students in various ways to try and manage both financial and so forth. There's also fellowships that's available that students can draw on. What we need to do as kind of a country is to make that available to students, make students aware of those potentials and the possibilities to draw on and access those funding opportunities.
Yeah. Would then something like developing a standard for the doctorate be I don't know, it's obviously not a panacea, but certainly something that would be pushing us in the right direction so that we address those inequities in terms of the quality of support that comes from the various institutions?
Yeah, I think because most institutions are financially bankrupt, it's difficult to do that. But yes, it'll be absolutely wonderful if each institution will have a budget item to support PhD students in various ways, both in the studies, in the fees, as well as give them opportunities to contribute to the academic engagement at all levels, including the undergraduate and postgraduate studies, and even research projects which they can be involved in. So yes, a nice bowl of money for the PhD students dedicated to their studies will be a panacea to assist the financial burdens of students.
Yeah. Professor Dudu, you've already mentioned the understanding of the developmental and structural elements that inform a doctoral experience. Particularly, we zoomed in on the students themselves. Let's broaden it then. Let's talk about the supervisory roles and relationships. The questions that need to be asked around the quality of supervision. So issues around precise and timely feedback, frequent meetings that discuss the various roles and the expectations, but also a supportive, cordial type of relationship that maybe even in a way incorporates respect for timelines.
Thank you so much. The report says there is really inadequate and sometimes absent training opportunities for new supervisors or co-supervisors, which inevitably impact on the progress of the doctoral students. I tend to disagree a bit. I may be wrong, but what I see is opportunities are given or are granted, but the uptake is not there. Some colleagues really do not want to go for this, and it affects the students at the end. For example, Stellenbosch, UCT, they have these training programs for supervisors and promoters, and they are open to institutions, other institutions, where the fees, therefore, if involved, can be paid by the respective institutions where these staff members come from. But when we advertise them, the uptake is not there. So I totally disagree to say there is no opportunities given. For me, I see as if the opportunities are there, but colleagues are a bit reluctant to take them for one reason or the other. It can be workload, among others, I'm not sure.
Yeah. And what's the way around this?
The idea here is we really want a quality product. So emphasis has to be given by the research teams to ensure that tracking is done as scrupulously clean as possible. For example, monitoring reports. Each institution, for example, must have monitoring reports whereby there is constant conversations on how the student is working with the supervisors. So reports must be provided, for example, so that if there are problems, they can be detected early and then they can be ameliorated before the student gets into trouble for studying for 5-6 years, of which maybe academic rules by that time are not going to allow for such.
Let's take a break. When we continue next, we interrogate the impact of an increase or even a decrease in enrollment as far as PhD studies are concerned? And what does that mean in terms of research and development and innovation in the country? Explore that next as we take your thoughts and your views. Is enough focus being given to doctoral students as far as their motivation, their achievement, as well as their well-being? Stay with us. Back tonight here in Focus, and the conversation continue. We ask the question, what are the features in our doctoral experience that leads to the high dropout rate? Are we paying enough attention to the performance of the students, their well-being, as well as the other factors that are, of course, a challenge for them? Dr. Whitfield Green still with us, Professor Labby Ramrathan, and Professor Shervani Pillay, as well as Professor Washington Dudu. We put that question to you on 072-110-5584. And some responses, Dr. Green, have come through, and I'll just read some of them of what the students are saying. Some lecturers, professors are gatekeepers with racial textures for MSc PhD programs. My supervisor says he spent 5 years to complete his PhD, so there is no way I, as a black person, can complete my PhD in less than 5 years better than him. All we want is equal respect and treatment. That's Manuel in Johannesburg. Kibanetsi in Mafikeng say the dropout rate is because of finances. In other countries, doing a PhD is equivalent to working. You get paid a full salary with benefits because your research contributes to resolving social, economic, political, legal, and even health issues in society. Pressure saying, Tabo, regarding doctoral students, the reason why there is a high dropout rate is that racism plays a role. I just submitted my thesis, and the results were that 2 examiners recommended addressing comments and awarding the degree, and 1 said, no, this is so unfair. I'm now working on all comments and will definitely resubmit my thesis for graduation. Dr. Green, the question of gatekeeping, the question of race coming into play, and of course the other question around the livelihoods and finances also featuring in those WhatsApp messages. What's your reflection?
Thank you very much. I think this issue captured broadly under the theme of institutional culture is something that we have to pay strong attention to. In 2019, Minister Nzimande instituted a task team on the recruitment, retention and progression of black academics. And one of the strong elements that came through the research undertaken there was the role that institutional culture was playing in either promoting or inhibiting the success of doctoral students based on identity. So when students couldn't see themselves in the academy, they couldn't see role models, their voices weren't allowed to be expressed, then these started to act as barriers that prevented full participation, progression, and even success. So I certainly think this issue of institutional culture that embeds elements of race, embeds elements of gender, embeds elements of patriarchy, and embeds a whole range of issues that devolve from our history is something that we have to attend to as part of the package of factors that relate to student success. It's really great to hear the voices of the students, because I think if we listen more attentively to the students and to take account of their experiences, we're more likely to be able to proactively and more responsibly respond to the issues that we are facing.
Yeah. Professor Pillay, I mean, more than the other categories which we have spoken broadly on, time of degree completion, socialization, dissertation, logistics, and supervisory roles, there is this question that also comes up of gender, of inequality, of race as well. Explore for me in respect of that, what are some of the interventions precisely that can be factored in here?
I think it's critical that you establish an environment that is underpinned by social justice and equity values and principles. So that is one of the critical aspects of the environment. And of course that's linked to what Dr. Green is saying about the institutional culture. For example, at our university and in our faculty, we have a very humanizing approach. And this humanizing approach underpins, everything that we do, our processes, our curriculum, etc. I think it's also important for doctoral programs and environments to work towards a decolonization narrative, so that students also can relate to what they are doing. I think largely the disciplines historically have marginalized African students and African knowledges and so forth, and African languages. So the creation of multilingual research spaces for doctoral students is also important. Another strategy that I found very helpful was to have a complaints process that is underpinned by these values and that is fair and transparent, and to encourage students who have these kinds of, who experience these kinds of problems to actually bring it up. And I find that students actually do, when they know that you listen to them, when they know that this is the environment, and that if they are actually experiencing these kinds of discrimination, they know that they can actually, report it or be part of a process. So it's important that students, and I think this is what the CHE is saying, that there are so many policies and processes in place, but it's important for students to know what these are, for them to understand it, to make it accessible for them, so that they know that there are avenues that they can, of course, pursue. I also think it's important, like I said, the environment is very critical, and the kind of supervisors that are allocated to the students, there has to be a rigorous process in place. So those are the important things, and I just think the kind of, sexism and racism, that is quite unacceptable. But of course it does happen, and so you have to have mechanisms in place. You've got to have strategies in place that students are aware of, and where these things can be attended to, as well, of course, to the environment that you are creating for these postgraduate students, to motivate them, to make them feel, that they're part of a national imperative, and make them understand that they are, or not make them, but motivate them to understand that they are contributing to national goals as well. And, they need to understand their value. And I think those are important things for doctoral students in terms of trying to mitigate against any kind of discrimination. And I think, at the university we have a zero tolerance on those all forms of discrimination, and we make our students aware of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Professor Ramrathan, how critical a feature is this issue of gender, this issue of race that is being raised by our viewers this evening when it comes to the overall doctoral experience? When you speak of institutions of higher learning, one immediately knows that you're speaking of an environment where those who are there are quite alert to racial issues, quite alert to gender issues, and are quite vocal about them. But how much focus are those aspects given prominence in terms of shaping the doctoral experience?
I think one of the things that we really have to understand, and as you mentioned, is the environment of being in a higher education institution where students are vocal. They confront issues. There is a student, a representative of the council as well that really brings to fore these kinds of discourses. I must also say that, we live in a context where racial discourses, gender discourses, and other discriminatory discourses are very much part of our daily kind of repertoire. And what we need to do, and this is really also plays out in the higher education environment as well. So as Shervani and Whitty said, the policies and processes that are available at the universities do allow for students to take up issues like this. So it's not only from the perspective of students who feel discriminated against. We also have that against staff who feel the students are discriminating and so forth. So it's not a one-way kind of feature where there's discrimination from the university side towards the students, but it also happens the other way. So it's quite prevalent. We've experienced a lot of challenges. There is lots of mechanisms in place to intervene, to address issues. One of the most serious kinds of challenges we have is when students and supervisors have difficulties and challenges. And this really creates a problem where there has to be some mediation in terms of developing social relations over and above the academic relations to mitigate these kinds of activities. So just moving a student from one supervisor to another is not helpful. But it's about addressing it, about understanding it, and about understanding the project ahead that actually helps us to drive and to kind of almost marginalize the discourses in favor of the academic discourses that are driving a doctoral program. But we mustn't be, naive to say that it doesn't happen. It is quite, prevalent across the institutions within the South African context.
Professor Dudu, as we wrap up, that National Planning Commission target of producing 5,000 doctoral graduates by 2030, how important is that? And if we fall short of it, will it be the end of the world? Or we should be, as you put it, focusing on quality more than just quantity?
It's quite important because we know the way they contribute to the economy. And then once we fall short, it is also of great concern. But like I always say, let us try to focus on quality and not on numbers. Because it's so worrisome to have some PhD graduates who don't portray to be PhD graduates. And it's so annoying, and it's not good for the country. So for me, let the focus be more on quality rather than quantity. As much as we chase numbers, but let there be quality within it. So quality assurance processes must be in. I'm interested when one of the listeners said 2 examiners passed and 1 did not. I would really want to say, let's approach this with an open mind. Are the comments not really worth trying to pursue and see if they don't improve that doctoral degree or product? So for me, I would say, I would look at such a report with with so much interest, because I really want to see, is it not the facts on the table rather than the other issues? So for me, quality is very important. Rather than chasing numbers and quantity, let us also focus on quality. Because if we have quality, then the quantity can also count.
Folks, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on and helping us in this conversation this evening. That is Dr. Whitfield Green, the CEO of the Council on Higher Education, Professor Washington Dudu from the Northwest University, University of KwaZulu-Natal's Professor Labby Ramrathan, and Professor Shervani Pillay from the Nelson Mandela University. And thank you for your engagement and getting in touch with the show tonight.